Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from her heart, sharing authentically with her students. On the podcast, you'll hear anatomy lessons, stories from teachers, interviews with others in the field, and a dose of personal growth, because having a strong, healthy mindset is such an important piece of being a confident teacher. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Bare Bones Yoga for daily videos. And you'll also see a new link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link, a literal vending machine for you to select how you best want to be supported as a teacher. There, you'll find links to the podcast, free resources, and other ways I can help you be the best teacher you can be. And don't forget, every single week, in addition to recording you a new episode of this show, I also teach yoga classes and free workshops specifically for yoga teachers. The only way to get your invite is to be on my mailing list. You can do that simply by going to my website, barebonesyoga.com, and down at the bottom, entering your email in the box. Here we go with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 299. Oh my goodness, one episode away from a huge milestone, 300 episodes. Today, you are going to have the extreme pleasure of meeting Tracy Goodwin, and I'm going to tell you in a moment a little bit about Tracy so that I can sort of set the stage for this conversation that I had with her back on May 20th. I'm recording this intro on the 30th, and this episode will go live on June 3rd, 2024. Before I get into a little bit about Tracy, and of course, we'll go into that more when I hop over to the conversation we had, I wanted to just throw out there, I've mentioned this on a number of other episodes as we head towards this milestone of episode 300 of my show. If you're out there listening and you are a yoga teacher, and maybe you've been listening to my show for a while, maybe you've been following me on social media, you want to feel more confident when you're teaching, you want to feel like you're speaking from your own words, from your own knowledge, you want to have a better handle on anatomy, sharing cues and building sequences with ease, I am offering a special offer in partnership with this milestone of hitting episode 300. So if what I just described is part of your dream, or maybe is your dream, to just have teaching feel so easy and fun, I want you to send me a DM with the words episode 300, or you can even just say 300, and I'll know what that means, because I'm tagging this milestone with an opportunity to give you, the listener of my show, a huge incentive to work with me inside my program. So you can DM me here, or you can DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga, the words episode 300. I'll know what you mean. I'll share with you the incentive to enroll, and we'll get you started, and we'll get you on the path to just literally transforming as a yoga teacher. So with that, I want to introduce the guest on my show today, Tracy Goodwin. I am so excited that she is with us here. For over 30 years, Tracy has been a true expert in voice technique and storytelling. She is a professional actor who directed plays in several countries, and she's a world-renowned person for her expertise in teaching her clients how to connect and captivate their audience. This is absolutely a huge part of teaching yoga, and that's why I asked Tracy to be on my show. Tracy has her BFA in directing, 2 masters, and has coached hundreds of people around the globe on how to step into their voice power, sound more confident, heal their voice story, find their authentic voice, and make a significant impact with their message. Her true purpose is to be a voice coach through her proven approach, psychology of the voice. Whether you're an actor, speaker, entrepreneur, business executive, leader, podcaster, or yoga teacher, Tracy will help you uncover your voice stories and voice masks layer by layer so that your soul and heart are in perfect harmony with your authentic voice. When she's not acting, directing, or coaching her clients into greatness, she enjoys watching her son excel as a budding anime cartoonist or catching a beautiful sunset. I am so excited to have Tracy on the show. I specifically sought her out because a huge part, if not the biggest part of what we do as yoga teachers is public speaking, is having eyes on us, but doing it in a way where we are stepping into our most empowered way of connecting with other people and teaching this practice and sharing authentically. And because that is so much of what I just described that Tracy does and what you'll hear from her when we hop to the episode, I just felt this was a really important guest to share with you. So with that, we're going to hop over to my conversation with Tracy Goodwin. Why don't we start out? Tell me first, where are you? Where are you in the world?
I'm in Sarasota, Florida.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
Great. I'm in Boston, so we are getting
Oh,
this weather, but nothing that can compete with what you're getting down there.
yeah. It's like living in paradise.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it is. So why don't we kick it off? Just give me a sense of, I mean, I have some background because I also am a business by design student. So I've heard your interview with James Wedmore, and so I'm familiar, but I think for the listener who doesn't have familiarity with you, just share a little bit about what you do.
That is probably the hardest question of our time together.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Well, people will say I'm a voice coach.
Yeah,
And then everybody who has ever worked with me or known me will say, don't ever call yourself a voice coach.
yeah.
I work with the vehicle of the voice,
Mhm.
but I work with the vehicle of the voice from a very unique perspective. I work on the psychology of the voice before I ever address any sound. I've been doing this work for 3 decades. I have researched over 27, I've done over 27 research studies on the voice and the psychology of the voice. It is my own creation. And I approach voice from the perspective of the wounds that we have, the unhealed fear of rejection, abandonment, worth.
Mhm.
And I also approach voice from the perspective of how our voices are being processed in the subconscious of the listener.
Mhm.
So I can tell people why they're not selling,
Mhm.
why we're not connecting with them. So it is the vehicle of voice, but it is really more of an inside job on an
Yeah.
outside product.
So, of course, in the time we're going to have together here, it's going to be hard to encapsulate all of your many, many, many years of
Mm-hmm.
experience. Although I'm wondering, when you started this work, did you have the framework of the psychology? Okay, so give me a little bit of how you ended up with that as your kind of cornerstone of what you do.
So I didn't want to be a voice coach. I knew I could hear 7 layers of sound. I was raised in a family where I wasn't allowed to speak. And there were catastrophic events that happened in my life because of that. And I kept having people show up to coach their voices. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I will be a fraud. I finally broke down and started teaching dialects. It was in the dialect work that I discovered that the subconscious creates the dialect. From there, I taught typical voice coaching. Speak louder, Karen. Speak slow to. And I nearly lost my mind because I knew there was something so much more. So I walked away from being a voice coach. I did it like everybody else did it, so I would fit in. I walked away and became a furniture refinisher. And one day, while the phone was ringing and I was refusing to answer it, I heard the voice of God in my head say, "What are you doing? What are you doing? I didn't put you there to finish furniture. Let's go." And I knew in that moment I had to come back in and work from the perspective of the layers of sound that I hear. Like I can tell you all these things. And within 48 hours, I knew it was called psychology of the voice.
Okay.
And then little by little, working with people and continuing the research, I built the framework. I had an understanding that pillar one had to be unearthing the noise, that the noise had to come, all the pieces of pillar one had to happen first, or working with the sound wouldn't stick. Then I worked with the sound that actually became what is now called voice masks. And then it was bringing in the seventh layer, which is the true real voice. So it was a process, but when I made the decision that I cannot do typical voice coaching, I have to work from this understanding of hearing the wound. It
Yeah.
all fell into place very quickly.
Okay, so one of the things that's standing out to me is this idea of layers. So can you talk
Mhm.
a bit about what does that mean? Does that reflect the voice that we share with the world has a certain depth to it or texture to it, and there's getting to the heart of who you are if you want to be heard in an authentic way? I mean, I'm trying to kind of take a
Yeah.
leap. So tell us.
Seventh layer is your real voice. It's all the sounds that you are not giving the world. I hear them, and it becomes the North Star. On top of that, we have 6 layers that protect us, 6 layers of cover up sounds that are covering up my imposter syndrome or being a peacekeeper because I'm actually a people pleaser and I want to. So there's 6 layers of protective sounds in every voice.
Got it. Got it. So we're not here talking about what you're saying. It's the sound that you're making. So I'm thinking about like up talkers, people that end
Mhm.
what they say with that sort of upward inflection. You know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
I'm guessing that there's some underlying meaning behind that. You see, my voice just went up there.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of what typical voice coaching might say is drop the end of that sentence. Don't lift that up. But that will not stick until I find out why you're asking my permission, which is the psychology of the voice. Well, I don't feel good enough. I feel, I always had to keep everybody happy. We've got to find the story. That's the psychology of the voice that's linked to the habit that says question when it's not a question. But the buyer then goes, okay, I guess you're really not an expert
Right,
on
right.
the subconscious level. So, yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, and I think about this. I mean, my work is working with yoga teachers to help them build their confidence and build their
Mhm.
skills around specific areas, cueing, sequencing, and understanding anatomy. And I find, sort of similar to what you're saying, that a lot of the behaviors that teachers have that they don't like, for instance, it takes me a really long time to prep for my classes, that when I talk to them about that, behind that behavior that they don't like, who wants to give up their weekends to have to sit and plan for the week ahead's classes? But there's a belief behind the prep. If I don't have new things to share, they won't like, my students won't
Right.
like. So it's sort of similar. So
Mhm.
in the context of someone walking in a room, teaching a yoga class, um, I feel like there's a lot that you're saying that we as teachers want to be aware of, especially because the recipient of our verbalization is not talking back. There's no ability for them to ask questions to clarify. So with that as sort of a scenario, does anything come up for you about how this would apply to someone who's using their voice in this very specific way?
Yes. Well, the biggest thing, and I typically I go against the grain of what the world has taught us, typically.
Me too.
Okay. So, and nothing I say is bad. I just hear it like I hear it. And you may agree with me. You may go, I
Yeah.
vehemently disagree. But I see something happen with yoga teachers, meditation teachers, and fitness leaders. There is a way they are supposed to vocally be, and that is creating a block to connection, and it is not revealing all the sounds that are truly in them that can take the listener, the buyer, on a real experience.
So in this case, the listener would be the yoga student,
The
not
student. Yeah.
so, the student in class. So, okay, so I'm with you. I'm struggling to try to see like what does that look like in the 3D? Like what would the teacher be
So
doing?
they are potentially putting on a voice mask, and a voice mask is now, I'm a professional, Karen, and I'm going to be professional in our time together. Now, this sounds fantastic, but you have no clue who I am anymore. So they're putting on voice masks to be what the world said they needed to be, not you as their instructor, but I've got to be the yoga teacher, or I've got to, and there's a bunch of different voice masks. And so what that does, it creates a block to connection, and then none of who they really are can come through. Like who I am is coming through.
Right,
But if I have my mask on,
right.
then you can never know me. So that's a big thing that I see happen. And I've taken many a meditation teacher and yoga teacher, and I said, well, what if you really expressed what you truly felt about what you were talking about? And it changed the game. But they're limiting that emotional connection from a voice perspective because they're being something. And sometimes that can even come off of an imposter syndrome or a lack of confidence. So I've got to pretend I'm something because
Mhm.
I don't truly feel confident, when what we really need to do is flip the switch and plug in a technique where they can take ownership, vocal ownership, because we're going to buy into whatever they're bought into. So if they're bought into, I got to be nice, then we're going to buy into something that says, I don't know if she's my person.
Mhm. Is that, I mean, I remember in my very first teacher training, which I mean, I've been teaching for over 20 years, so it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Remember when we would practice teach, people would say, where did your voice go? You're putting on a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sort of, we didn't call it a voice mask, but I remember, and are people aware that they're doing this? I mean, we're talking about yoga teachers, so we could stay in that scenario. In general, though, are people aware of this?
Once it's brought to their attention.
Mhm.
So I can identify immediately. I'll say, what are you trying to prove? Why did you ask me that? Because I hear it all over your voice. Well, I tried to prove my worth to my father my whole life. Okay, well, you're trying to prove that you're good enough to all your clients.
Got it. Got it.
So sometimes, so always retrospectively, sometimes, like I have a lot of people pleasers, and a people pleaser will neutralize, and they know they're people pleasers. They may not have put the connection together from the voice perspective, but as soon as it's brought to their attention, they immediately know.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a feeling that when a teacher, I mean, I can speak for myself. I knew I was doing it because I felt, especially in the very beginning, this was happening in the very beginning, that I needed that. It was almost a blend of mimicking my first teacher
Yeah.
and stepping into this role that I wasn't quite sure I was worth being in that role. And this was many years ago before imposter syndrome was even defined, but I knew
Yeah.
that was part of it. So I sort of hung my hat on trying to sound like the person who trained me.
Yes. Yes. And the danger, now is what we're seeing in the research around buyer trends and what the buyer, but for years, I lived in the Walter Cronkite generation. And that is vehemently being rejected now from a sales perspective. I don't know if you teach these people to enroll people in their classes,
Not
but
necessarily, but when you think about teaching yoga, I mean, we don't necessarily say there's a sales aspect to it, but there definitely is a building connection aspect.
mhm.
You think about, you know, in a sales context, you want to build connection to make a sale, but in a yoga class, you want to build connection, which sort of lives in a similar space.
Yeah. So any mask will block connection, and people are seeking in 2.5 seconds connection. People are seeking connection and authenticity on a level we've never seen before. They have to know who we are. and they have to feel us, is what I call it.
They have to feel
Connected. They have to, well, it's like it feels a certain way when I'm talking to you like this, and it feels totally different when I'm talking to you like that. You can't feel me anymore.
right.
I equate it to bulletproof glass in a big city bank. I can
Right.
see the teller, I can hear the teller, but I can't get close to the teller.
Yeah, and in this world of AI, I sort of feel like it almost goes to an AI type voice.
Totally.
And absolutely for yoga teachers, and we all sort of have that moniker of, oh, you go to the spa and the person is speaking to you in their spa voice, the
Hmm.
taking care of setting you up with your massage or whatever. So I can relate to that. So I'm curious about the research. I've never thought of this through the lens of research. What kinds of research has been done around this concept?
Well, I don't know of any other than the research that I've done.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my very first research studies was done on tracking stories and where they came from. And every single participant in those stories knew the exact phrase that was spoken to them before they were 5 years old, that established that first story. So there's a research study where I can quantifiably say before we're 5 years old, one phrase can affect how we use our voice the rest of our lives. Last year, I did a huge study on trust and buying, and I recorded 14 voices. They did not sell anything. They did not state their name or their company. And then I brought in hundreds of people to listen to the recordings to determine when we trust a voice, when we will buy from someone. And then the third piece of the research was meant to be, where do they intersect? But I got a surprise in that research. And in that research, I discovered that over 60% of us will trust a voice, but we will not buy because of that trust. And that was done through recordings and test audiences and tracking hundreds and hundreds of pieces of data.
Interesting. So the voice connection alone between the listener and the speaker wasn't enough to motivate the listener to do a particular thing.
To take action, to buy. And
Okay.
that is because over the last 4 years, people have been significantly burned.
Okay.
It's the window. If I had done that study in 2019, I would have gotten it would have lined up.
Right. Right. Got it. So does that suggest in your mind that there's something additional that needs to happen in
Well,
order?
I went back to do more research when I got that result. And that's when I discovered in the next piece of research that I did that it is connection is the number one thing.
Got it. Got it. So the idea of connection is certainly, as I mentioned before, very relevant to yoga teachers because, I sort of think about when we walk around the room, especially if that's the way we are teaching, which I encourage people to do versus sort of the practice with me model.
Mhm.
Someone's up at the front of the room practicing and the students are simply watching the person and the person is simply just saying, step your foot here, but they're
Mhm.
with them. In this other model, which I call the walk and talk, they're walking around and they're the ability to build connection is oftentimes part of what distinguishes one teacher from another. I mean, students can sort of feel that. I call it almost like the it factor, this idea that is out there already, this idea of, a yoga teacher who has the it factor. They're building connection with their students, they're walking around the room, they're speaking from what they know. The students feel held, they feel like this person really knows what they're talking about. And yet, in that, is there something in your work that can help a yoga teacher? Because I don't know that I'm even being as specific enough around, well, how do you build connection with your students? So I'm curious in the work that you do, what can we do with our voices to build that connection? Is it a lot of this sort of introspective work to really uncover the kinds of memories and past traumas and limiting beliefs that we have that prevent us from using that unmasked voice? What can we do to sort of get more to the root of our true voice?
Well, that is definitely where I start. And we have to look at it from two pieces because a lot of times people will have done a lot of inner work, but it has to be removed from the voice because the voice keeps the score like the body keeps the score. It is literally held in the muscles of the structure of the voice. So I can rewrite that. I can question and eradicate that story that I'm bothering people, but I have to move it out of the muscle memory of the voice as well, because it's going to play like a habit. But yes, the first place we have to look is we have to look at what are the voice stories. Oftentimes, character traits can absolutely block connection. Anyone that's outcome driven, problem solver, no nonsense, there will be a blocked connection because they are vocally somewhere else. I don't know where else, I don't even know where that is. So it becomes a missed connection. Character traits play into it, where we are working from, meaning, are we in the future thinking about what people are thinking about? Are we deciding whether or not people like us? Are we trying to get people? The minute people go to, I'm going to try to get them, I'm going to try to, it's over. We just have to own that and be that. So that is definitely the first thing that we have to look at in order to crack the mask for results that stick.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can slap on something that is technique, but it's just it's not gonna stick as long as that story is running and going, who do you think you are?
Yeah, that particular situation you just described, I can definitely remember times over the years where I would be speaking, but there'd be a running commentary in my head at the same time. And I would kind of,
Mhm.
in the moment, be chuckling to myself, like, little do they know that there's this whole other conversation I'm having. But by that point, I was good enough that I could keep the words coming out of my mouth to keep the sequence going. But if I was feeling insecure or if I was being triggered in a particular way, there would be this other commentary in my head. And I thought, isn't that amazing that the brain can actually do that? Kind of keep up. I mean, if you get the teaching the sequence part even close to that unconscious competent level, you can just run with that. And then at the same time, almost be berating yourself like, oh, they're not liking this, or oh, they're bored. Look at the looks on their faces. So, like with that kind of scenario, does that come from, or is the solution, because that obviously gets in the way of being present. So does that come, is the step there to uncover what those limiting beliefs are and bring those to the surface so that that voice sort of, that inner voice starts to quiet a bit?
Well, there's multiple pieces to it, actually. I mean, the stories have to be dealt with, but then we have to completely stop working from the future and the past. Because even if we're even thinking those thoughts, they are coming out in the voice.
Right.
And that's what I call vocal foreshadowing. So one of the first pieces that people have to do is they have to work from the now. Because as soon as I start deciding that I think I know what you're thinking, now I'm going to be talking like this, and I may not even realize it, but your brain is going to process that in a way that misrepresents me.
Yeah.
So being in the now is crucial.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you talk about sort of assuming that we know what a person thinks. I mean, that's so much the experience of a yoga teacher because the students aren't talking back. So there's a lot of assumptions that are made. Oh, she doesn't like this. Oh, she's bored. Or she thinks this is too hard, or whatever is going on in the person's head. And I often talk about there's the things you can control as a teacher, and there's the things you can't. You can't control what somebody's going to think per se, and I sort of feel like that lines up with what you're saying, because in these scenarios, you're saying the person is almost trying to control what the other person is thinking, and their voice is a reflection of that. Is that?
Mhm. Yeah, I completely eradicate that. I completely remove read the room, which people bristle when I bring it up, but it's one of the destroyers. because we're indoctrinated with that. We're taught that from a very young age, even in our parents. How am I doing? How am I being? Let me change who I am. So I take it away and then I give it back differently because I can read the room, but I'm not going to alter who I am. And what people typically are doing is they're reading the room, making a decision that they do not know. They can even ask the person, that person could lie, and they're altering who they are to try to accommodate something they don't even know. And there goes authenticity. And now I don't really even know who you are anymore. I got to go find my person. Another research study I did, ideal clients are seeking sounds. They want to hear the sounds in the voice of the person that they want to work with because there's a certain experience they want to have.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we start altering who we are,
Yes.
we're misrepresenting the sounds that truly who we are. And those may be the sounds people are seeking,
Right.
not the misrepresenting sounds, if
Right.
that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, and it's sort of a slippery slope because it gives me this idea of like we're morphing ourselves every time we're reading the room and we're not really sure that our read is correct. That particular situation is again relevant for yoga teachers because the whole idea of reading the room, reading the energy of the room, that's a pretty common phrase. Teachers will walk in the room, they'll get a sense before they start teaching, oh, are people just laying around, are people chit-chatting with one another, is there like a frenetic energy? Like depending on the teacher, sometimes people will lean very much into this idea of I can read the energy of the room and now I'm going to do something that I feel is a match. Like if I walk in the room and it's a 6 o'clock after work class and I feel like there's this frenetic energy, I'm going to assume that everybody needs to move, move, move because I'm sensing there's just a high level of energy. And it sounds like what you're saying is number one, that's a guess. And number two, how are you altering your authentic way of showing up to try to meet that assumption?
I don't know that I think it's a guess. I think that can be accurate. But what I typically see people do is they then make vocal adjustments based on what they think they see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the slippery slope. So being an observer is great, but being an observer, almost like collecting data points, but then changing based on what I think I see, especially if I'm changing me, then that can be problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because when I mentioned my first teacher, when I began working with him, of course, I was brand new. But now looking back, and now that we're having this conversation, there were many ways that um, in looking back on it, he was quite masterful in this exact situation of it really didn't matter what the room was like as we waited for him. And he was so popular. There were sometimes over 100 people in the room, like waiting for him. And he would come in and he would just always be the same. He would always consistently. And it was even the kind of thing where I would be laying there and there would be this frenetic energy, like, oh, he's on the way, he's on the way. Like that sort of happens. And this was like over 20 years ago when yoga was here in the US just starting to get to be super, super popular. And he would walk in and it would just be like the switch, the light switch would go off. And I would feel like, wow, his energy is not even really he'd just be like, come into downward facing dog. And
Yeah,
I would just be
yeah,
like, oh my God, what just happened? Like, why isn't there any chit chat happening? Why
yeah.
are we using into this? But now I'm hearing you and I'm thinking, he had a very solid sense of who he was and he wasn't going to come in and blend.
Adjust.
Right.
No, I want to set the tone. I want 100%, no matter whether I like you, whether I don't, whether you're mad, whether you're mean, whether you're
Yeah.
crazy, whether you whatever, you get in the same version.
Right.
You're getting the same version, and it's always going to be the best version. And I call it the tentacles out versus the tentacles in. And we navigate in a tentacles out world. and I want the tentacles back in where I can become an observer and I can go, ooh, everybody's upset today. All right, let's go. Best version.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're telling me in that man he was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, it didn't pop into my brain until you started describing it. And that particular scenario is one that yoga teachers will definitely relate to. One of the things I remember, and I don't know how much this relates to the voice thing, but I remember in one of my early teacher trainings, we did this not experiment, we did this exercise where we all sat in a circle and everybody wrote on a piece of paper, similar to when you were describing like something you heard when you were a little kid that you in this context, it was write down something that you heard as a little kid that your mom or dad, a caregiver, primary caregiver would say to you that really made you feel loved. And we all wrote down whatever that was. And then we sat in a circle and each person had to switch. So they got somebody else's statement. And then one by one, as everybody sat in a circle with their eyes closed, each person got up and they said what was on the paper to the person next to them. And I'll never forget it. Everybody was just in complete tears. I mean, they were just completely, it was just a dam of emotion. And there was something about as adults hearing those statements. And, there were a lot of this that you are loved, you're a wonderful person, I'll always be here for you, whatever the statements were. Is there a connection with that, hearing that type of thing that allows us to get closer to that authentic person that we are, that we can reflect through the voice? Is there sort of an unmasking in that?
The positive things are not the problem. It's the negative. It's the, why are you so dramatic? Why are you a bother? Why are you so loud? Don't do that. Shh. The
Mm-hmm.
positive doesn't play into the game because the subconscious, when it comes to the voice, completely overrides anything positive and holds on to the negative. People can instantly, oh my gosh, I was standing by the stroller and my mom was crazy mad. And she said, why are you so much? I mean, people can go back to it like that. And they can be 70 and they can go, I know what the driver is. When I was 3, I'll never forget. My brother did, and they'll tell me the whole story. So it's the negative
Mm-hmm.
that creates the problem.
Mm-hmm. So is that like when you're working with somebody, how are you working to sort of get them? I imagine it's not right off the bat that somebody meets with you and they're at that place where they can call up this memory. Maybe it is, but like how do you get to like that unmasking?
Well, I can hear it. I can usually hear it. So I can hear a sound and identify what it is, and that allows them to immediately come up with the story. But people can shockingly come up with the story quite quickly when they're introduced to the concept of the whole thing. What were I introduced the concept of psychology of the voice, but I mean, with under a minute, I can tell them basically their whole life story or all the wounds that I hear or the masks that they wear. And in that conversation, they will almost immediately, most of the time, immediately come up with the story.
Got it. So you're just listening to their voice gives you an idea of, I was going to say the kind of person they are. It's not so much that, it's what they might be using their voice to cover up, but not at the level of a specific example. Like it's not like you would know, oh, it was when I was at the stroller. It's more
Many times it actually is.
like,
Many times it's, oh, I get it. You moved to Texas because you fell in love with a girl and she broke your heart and you're not sure what you're going to do. You think you're going to move back to Maryland, but you don't know because you like it here in Texas. How did
mhm,
you know that? And I tested it for a decade. I
mhm,
tested, am I hearing pieces of the story? What am I hearing? And then how is that lining up with what the individual, the listener, is processing in the subconscious?
mhm, mhm.
I don't always hear that much, but I always hear the masks. I always can tell all the different wounds. I can, and it's just the way I process sounds in my brain. It's just a gift.
How it's interesting. I remember years ago there was this story on 60 Minutes, and I remember the actress Mary Lou Henner was interviewed, and it was Mary Lou Henner and a number of other people have this ability where they can remember like dates. They have this like uncanny memory for any date at any time, what they were doing. And they were just talking in this story about how I can't remember all the context, but there were actually some sort of downsides to having this ability. And I'm just thinking as you're speaking, as you're moving about your day, like even interacting with me or interacting with other people, are you aware, like, are you able to kind of turn that
I
off, or is
have to. I have to. And I used to not turn it off. And then I have a lot of corporate executives I work with, and I did a training, and there was a lot of anger in the room. And I ran 105 fever for a week after I taught that class. And so I had a coach at the time. She said, we've got to find a way. You're taking it on. We've got to be able to, you have to be able to turn it off.
yeah, it's almost like a psychic. You have to kind of,
Almost, yeah. Yeah. And it's just really sound. I mean, if you ask me right now, what do you hear in my voice? I'd have to go, okay, hold on a minute. And I'd have to shift gears
yeah,
and lean into that piece. No, I don't navigate the world like
yeah,
that. It
yeah,
would
I can
take
see that
too
would be,
much.
yeah, almost. I think of, I even talk about that in the context of teaching yoga because we are dealing with other people's energy and
Yeah.
constantly teaching classes, especially teachers who teach a number of classes. If they're absorbing
Hmm.
people's energy, frustrations. I mean, there's a lot of things you're walking around the room. Maybe you give somebody a block, they bat it away, they don't want the block, or you're watching
Yeah.
somebody and you're giving them a modification, they don't want to do it. And I always think about like flight attendants just needing to be like ninjas of energy,
Yeah. Yeah.
sticking. They're just sort of moving about, doing their job and
Yeah.
giving people agency over, hey, if you want to act that way, that's fine, but I'm not
Hmm.
that on myself. Um,
Yeah. It's very much moving energy.
yeah.
It's very much moving energy.
Mhm. When I train teachers in my program, and I obviously work with James over the years, so I have a program that I sell.
Yeah.
Um, and part of the conversation we get into around teaching does involve the voice. Although now
Mm.
I'm kind of wondering how much should I sort of alter it based on what we're talking about. I do talk about things like tone and vocal quality and amplifying the voice, using silence. I mean, things that in the context of our conversation seem sort of minimal, kind of compared to like the depth of what we're talking about. I'm wondering though, how do those things factor into your model?
They do and they don't,
Mhm.
because anything that feels, well, it's just a deeper version of it. Because if we say tone, what does that mean?
I think it means to me, it means like almost like if I were sitting at a piano and I was trying to find the key that was most similar to my voice. I'm kind of looking for some um I'm making a choice I mean, I'll just speak for myself as a yoga teacher. I'm making a choice about what tone I'm accessing, similar to if I pick a song to sing at karaoke and I know that song's going to get to a place in terms of like a Whitney Houston octave type thing that I can hit. I know that tone is not going to work for me because I'm not going to be amplifying my voice in a way that's a match for that tone. So I'm going
Yeah.
to say picking something that's more of like in a key that I can be using my voice in a more controlled way so my words are landing on my students and they can really feel it in their bones.
Yeah. So I would equate that to finding all the authentic notes in a voice. And we typically have hundreds, and we typically play three, if that. So that's what's in that seventh layer, are all I call them the feel sounds. And then there's shades of those, and there's nuances of those, and then there's bits of us. So I wouldn't put it in a tone, because that is to me one thing. And this is about finding all the different notes. So
Mhm.
it's similar, but a little bit different.
Got it. Okay. Um, what about, and I don't know how this fits in, but what about using silence? Does that fit into communicating and using your voice? I mean, it sounds kind of antithetical because it's not saying anything. But in the context of teaching yoga, that is literally a tool that we can use. And I just know from using it as well as experiencing it, it does have a certain gravitas to it. Like
Oh
there's
yeah, it's very
like,
powerful.
yeah, can you speak a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of the yoga teachers I work with, they actually are aware of how much they're talking. You know, it's
Yeah.
like talking is happening as a compensation for, I'm not really sure what to say. I'm not really sure how to help you. I'm seeing all these bodies move in the room and I don't really understand anatomy. So I sort of feel like if I just keep saying things, well, straighten your leg, well, tuck your hip under, so they're aware of that. And I
Well,
don't know.
people struggle in the silence because they struggle with being seen and being heard and having that there's a lot of pieces to it. But when I stop talking, that feels real uncomfortable to the
Yes.
majority of the people that I've ever encountered. And
Mhm.
it's because we are so uncomfortable with all the focus on us or in the silence, or they're all looking at me, or they're all relying on me. And so let me just keep talking. Let me just keep filling the space and then I won't feel uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes. I feel like that is why, I mean, when I began teaching in 2003, we never used music. I mean, the first
Oh,
like,
yeah.
5 or 6 years I taught, we never, it was not a thing. It was not common. And so if I wasn't speaking, there was nothing. And there was such another layer of nervous system down regulation that would,
Mm-hmm.
because there was this balance between somebody's voice, my voice, and nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And now there seems to be just, it's just sort of an assumption. Well, there's going to always be some sound in the room filling up space. How does that affect, I mean, I'm going to say the yoga students, but a listener for someone's voice when there's music sort of.
I have to think about that for a minute, because music can blend out a voice, and a voice can also try to match music.
Mhm.
And so we're back with, what is the experience that we're creating?
Mm. Yeah, and I know in my training with teachers, I sort of, I mean, music is great. Moving to music is great. There's certainly a lot we can think about. Think about people who like to run to music. Like there is like sort of that rocky climbing up the stairs, and feel
Yeah, yeah.
kind of it gets you psyched. So it's not an either or, like you say. I am sort of curious though, and I know for myself as a newer teacher, the music sort of filled the space, which helped me to feel like, oh, there's always something in the background. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to be as worried about what I'm saying because, well, there's always that music to fill in. And over the years, I found that not using music actually took some courage. I had to
Mm-hmm.
actually be like very intentional. You know what? I'm not going to use music today.
Mm-hmm.
And that thought of, well, what if they don't like it? What if they ask for it? What if they say, why is there no music? That sort of, those sort of things will come up. So yeah, I don't want to say it's a crutch, but it just has become sort of this, you
It's a
know,
thing.
option.
It's a thing. Yeah. And I just love silence. I just love it. But people have to learn to be even comfortable in the uncomfortable of it. We don't even have to get comfortable with it, but
Yes.
I got to get really comfortable being uncomfortable, because silence, the way it's processed in the subconscious of the listener, makes it the most powerful tool. The silence is processed as, you care about me.
Huh. How did we get there?
I
How
did the
does,
research on it, and I and I had brought in a test audience, and
Uh-huh.
I tested them on different sounds and different tones, and you call them tones, I call them different
Yeah.
sounds in a voice, and silence. And what kept coming up in the silence was, I feel like you care about me. I feel like you care about me.
That
I
just
feel
made
like
the
you,
hair on the back of my neck stand up. That is
like, yeah,
profound.
it's profound. And I even tested it like, we would run questions, and we would run questions like, do you want to make more money, Karen? Because I can show you how to make more money. And there would be no pause there. And then I would do it again. And, or my people that were doing it, do you want to make more money? Because I can show you how to make more money. And so what the data kept showing was, in that moment, the first thought was, wow, she really asked me that question. She really cares about my answer,
Mhm.
just in that pause.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that. I do a lot of Instagram lives, and sometimes I'll talk about using silence and then I'll use it in the Instagram
Mm-hmm.
live I'm doing. And people will comment like, oh my God, that was so freaky how it was so meta how you actually did the thing you
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
about. It really felt different.
Yeah. Oh, it is the most powerful tool, and most people are terrified to use it.
So do you think that on the user end of things or the listener end of things, silence communicates caring because it's communicating that I see you as someone who has agency over what they are going to do next or how they're interpreting me? Or do you think it's being interpreted as, oh, well, she really cares about me because she's giving me time to process what
Time
she's,
to process.
yeah,
Time to process. And that's not the world we live in. We live in the world of, well, what do you think? Well, I don't know. Hey, you want to go out later? Hey, what, you want to come over later? Hey, what time do you want to shift the thing? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, la la la, all the time. It's competing voices. We don't even listen anymore to listen. We listen to respond.
right. Right. Yeah, I know sometimes when my boyfriend Ben and I argue, I say it's because I feel like he's anticipating what I'm going to say
Mm. And
rather than
planning. Yeah,
rather than just letting me say
yeah,
what it is. He's like, well, speed it up, get to the point. And I'm like, well, this is a conversation where
yeah,
I have agency
yeah,
over how much I say, and you are just listening. You are not jumping me forward, to the
yeah,
point. That's fascinating. And that has such amazing relevance for yoga teachers because you want your students, I mean, if you're telling them to go from downward dog to warrior one, you want to tell them what to do so they can do it and give them appropriate time to do it.
yeah.
Tell them the next things.
That's right. And in our own insecurity, in that inability to just be in that silence, because typically our place, this is what typically happens in the brain in that silence. They give them an instruction. If they hold that silence, their brain will almost always immediately go to, they're going to think, I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to think I don't know what I'm, they're going to interrupt me. They're going to think I don't know where to go to next. So let me just keep going, because then it sounds like I know what I'm doing.
Right.
When really the brain is processing it like, hold up a minute, I'm not as good as you are,
Right.
is oftentimes what's happening. And that's probably not what the yoga teacher is realizing is happening in the brain of the student.
Right. Right. And I mean, what a beautiful way to build connection with your students simply by using silence as a way to communicate, I care about you.
Mm-hmm.
From the student's point of view, wow, she really sees me. She really cares about me. I really feel connected to this teacher. She really gets me. She really gets how I need this extra space to get myself into the pose,
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And there's a safety thing in it too. I feel safe to take my time because you're not moving on. And then sometimes how the brain can process moving on is, I'm not good enough to
Yeah.
work with this person.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's sort of so paradoxical because a lot of times I have conversations and the thought is, well, I need to be saying more things. I need to be telling that, inhale, lift your leg, exhale, step forward. Well, why not just say step forward? Oh, well, I
Mhm.
need to say inhale. I was trained to say blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
blah. And it
Mhm.
becomes this like running commentary, almost like conversational cueing, ba 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 ba
Yeah.
ba, ba,
Yeah.
rather than dot, 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 almost like haiku, just
Mhm.
forward, drop your back heel, reach your arms up, and then nothing.
Mhm.
Not even breathe, like they're going to be breathing.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That that's amazing. That is like a real takeaway because that really gets to, I think, the essence. We want our students to feel like we care about them because we do.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah.
Um, I was curious when you were mentioning earlier about the executive working with you. Um, like why would somebody, I mean, I know you in the context, I was introduced to you because you worked with James, and James is an entrepreneur and he obviously uses his voice. Um, Give me a little background on like executives seeking you out. How are they?
I have about 60% of my client base is at my largest company is United Airlines. And then I have everybody in between. I have tons of insurance, tons of finance, and they're all referrals, so they all know my work. They know that I can truly build confidence in their leaders, or I can make their salespeople more money. So they typically come for they know the work. So they know that it's not typical voice coaching, but I work with a lot of leaders. They want the leaders to be able to command more of a presence and stand in authority and communicate more effectively so their message is heard. And so with a lot of my corporate people, I end up teaching them things like ownership phrases, where in conflict and difficult conversations, their message will be received. And navigating, I have a four-prong concept. So I don't have to go into that, but basically really being able to lead all different types of people with all different types of personalities effectively. And then when I work with sales teams, I just make them more money.
Mhm. And when you work, I mean, I think about the people that I work with are, a little more maybe willing to sort of go down the emotional rabbit hole that is
Mhm.
uncovering one's
Yeah.
limiting beliefs and things like that. Do you find with kind of corporate executive types, I'm assuming a lot of them are male, that if those kinds of issues come up, they're willing to kind of go.
Mine are. Yeah, mine are. And I don't know whether it's because it's all referral and they all have heard about my work and they all, know that it's going to be weird and she's going to tell you things about you that's going to freak you out. And I would guess that's why they're open, but very rarely do I get someone that I call them a chimney person, because I have different concepts, and they'll be in pretty intense resistance, but they're very few and far between. They're always quite receptive to where we go.
Yeah. I listened to was she on your podcast or I think she was on there was a recent interview you did with a woman and I'm forgetting her name, but she is oh, the ginger.
Oh, Megan, yeah.
Yes, yes. And so she was sharing a lot about her personal story, and
Hmm.
so I have that in my mind. Is there I'm curious, like when you're done working with people, what are the I mean, I feel like in a way they come to you with sort of this armor on and you're kind of taking that armor down. What does that transformation look like? I'm imagining like for a corporate executive who might have a certain communication style and the armor is really there and then they work with you and now it's like the armor's down. How does that look and how do they experience life differently when they're done working with you?
There's a lot of pieces to that question. One, their relationships are way stronger because a lot of it has to do with removing the masks. And
Mhm.
so they're able to say things that they typically oftentimes haven't said before. I teach them to communicate in a way where the message will be received is part of it. But a big part of it is that fullest expression, where before it's been about facts, it's been about information, it's been about data. And a huge part of the work that I do is rolling in feeling. And that's typically, especially in the corporate world, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
And then they do, because I teach them how to do it in a way where it's not like crying on the conference table, where it's really this fullest expression and getting them in alignment where their words match their sound, match their body. And so it now all of a sudden I don't have to say I'm fine. I can now go, you know what is happening, John, is I'm feeling really disappointed and I don't know which way to go and I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but we need to have a conversation. And now John will finally open up and have a conversation because now he heard the message.
I mean, that could reshape a company's culture.
Totally. Totally.
Especially if it's someone at a higher level within an organization, because then they'll probably filter that down to the people that report to them.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah. So
amazing.
typically if I go into a company, I end up coaching the whole company. Is now, I don't know about United, that's 90,000 people. That's a lot of folks.
Yeah,
But because it is a trickle down effect.
sure. I could see that.
Mhm.
Do you ever work with couples where like the person's coming to you specifically because of a problem they're having relating to their partner, or is it like that's just like with Megan, that seemed to be like a side
It was a
effect?
byproduct. It's a byproduct. And it's been fathers and daughters. I mean, I've had some huge corporate executives and they were like, this was great. But what really was great was my daughter will speak to me again. Because she's been thinking I don't believe in her for 3 years now. And that's because there were tones and sounds in their voice, masks. I just did a TED talk on this and I gave a bunch of examples of these masks. Yeah. And so like one of them was, I gave an example of a corporate executive and his daughter, and she thought he didn't believe in her. And the more he tried to alter to make her believe it, the more she vehemently rejected it because none of it was real. And so we had to pull away those layers. And yeah, I helped him in business, but it was really about that relationship. I've been asked to do that before, but I don't, not for any other reason than I already have a full schedule. And I think it just becomes a byproduct with all the people that I work with in the entrepreneurial space or the corporate space as it is. You know, I've been asked many times to do workshops, and maybe I'll do that someday. You know, it's a relationship and voice workshop, because I think in relationships, especially, this stuff plays out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm making a decision about what's really going on with her or him, and that's not what's got, I mean, it's very much a rubber band ball, but it's a big relationship crusher, the voice is.
Oh yeah. I can think of plenty of examples in this house. Um, as we're wrapping up here, I'm so glad you mentioned the TED Talk, because I remember we chatted about that. Tell me a little bit about what you spoke on and what was like the central premise of that presentation.
Yeah, so I spoke on the 6 voice masks that cost us success. And so the very first part of the talk, I touched on my story a little bit and a little bit about the concept of masks and the research that I did behind it. And then I gave 6 specific examples of the most prominent masks that I hear, but I used them from the perspective of culmination of clients. So like the first like mask number 1, don't bother them. The day I met Bill and he walked into my office the size of a linebacker, I stood up and I said, "Hey, Bill, it's so great to meet you." And he stuck out his hand and he said, "It's really nice to meet you." And Bill couldn't get anybody to listen to him at his own company. He had the mask of do not bother. And then I told a little bit about his story of having 6 older siblings. That's how, sisters, that's how the mask was created, what we did, what it was costing him and what the new outcome was. And then I went on to mask 2. And so I covered the top 6, and then I wrapped it up and I gave a solution for people to start playing with so that they could get on the other side of the mask where they could, their truest authenticities could start to seep through the cracks.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I know you started out by saying you see things very differently. And I can relate to that because the work I do with yoga teachers is very unique and I see things
Mm.
differently in terms of how the industry is typically training people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine people's minds were probably blown as you were giving this, because this is really not
It's not
taught.
typical. No, it's not. Nobody approaches it this way. I have searched high and low, and and I don't mean it as a discredit to typical voice coaching, but this has been my obsession. After not having even wanted to do it, when I agreed to do it and I realized what a gift I had been given, I became obsessed with it. And I became obsessed with really, and I I feel a tremendous responsibility. If I'm going to say it, it is
Oh,
going to be quantifiable. And
yeah,
I,
because
and
you're
I
actually removing somebody's mask, literally, that could be a protective mechanism
totally,
in using to move through their life,
totally.
relationships in their job, their relationships in their romantic life.
Yes, I take the work very seriously, and I will not discuss anything that I do not know for a fact I'm going in the right direction and that I will get them there. Because and I just, I've seen people try to emulate
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
and that terrifies me because they're not doing it in its fullest capacity, and it terrifies me. It's a real process, and it's a real vulnerability, and there's a real fragility around it, and I'm obsessed with it. And so the TED Talk was a huge piece for me. And then of course I'm trying to get the research out in a book, but I'm only about halfway through.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, is this in a book somewhere?
No, I'm working on it.
Inspired.
I'm working on it.
It sounds like, yeah, it's gonna be amazing. Yeah, I could see it being very delicate in those moments of
Very
first
delicate.
real for the person to start to be connecting. I mean, it's not therapy, but in a way, it's sort of
It
getting
is.
to
Yeah. Yeah. People ask me that a lot. My corporate people, especially, they'll go, is this therapy or is this voice?
Yeah, sometimes people say to me when they work with me, "Oh, you've become my yoga teacher therapist." And
Yeah.
it's really just in the unmasking of the belief that's behind the behavior. The belief comes from typically something when we were
Yeah.
growing up that
Totally.
I'm not qualified, and fast forward to where you are now, that belief is operating a little differently, but it all goes back to that core experience similar to what you described below.
Totally.
Um, yeah, I almost feel like, it just speaks to so much of how we operate in life does tend to connect to these early memories that we really had no
Yeah.
control.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. Now, I may have messed this up, but did we just need an hour?
Yeah, so we're gonna
Okay.
one up. Yep, we're gonna wrap this one up. So
Okay.
this is perfect. I think this is a great place to kind of button it up. Is there I'd love in this final moment here, um, just let people know, like, I know you have a full plate, but how they can connect with you. I know you're on Instagram, so just share what that is, where they find
Sh-
you on Instagram.
Sure. I'm Captivate the Room everywhere except LinkedIn. And there I'm Tracy Goodwin.
Okay, amazing. Anything else that you want to share before we close this off?
I don't think so. If you think this
No, I think
covers
this is
what is,
absolutely perfect and beautiful.
yeah,
I'm gonna put this up live. I'll put it up to go live a week from Monday, and I'll send you the link.
yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
great to see you live and in person, and
Yeah.
I look forward to sharing this. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out about it.
Of course. Okay. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to work with me. She's ready to take action. She's looking for someone who has the answers she needs. She knows she's worth the investment. She can't wait to get all her prep time back. And she's excited to make a positive change. If that's you, DM me the words podcast offer to my Instagram, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside my signature program. My Instagram handle is Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.